The first thing Princess Salyra noticed about the human was how small he looked, standing alone on the crystal dais, a single figure beneath vaulted alien arches meant to dwarf ambassadors and crush their pride. The court had been designed that way centuries ago when intimidation was cheaper than war, and yet the human did not bow low enough, did not avert his eyes long enough, and did not pretend to be afraid in the ways she had been taught to expect. Instead, he stood straight-backed, hands relaxed at his sides, dark eyes steady, not defiant but not submissive either, and something about that unsettled her far more than open arrogance ever could. She had refused him before he had even spoken. The refusal was procedural, ritualized, almost dull in its predictability. The union of systems demanded a symbolic bond to finalize Earth's protectorate status, a royal connection to legitimize trade corridors and military oversight, and she was the one chosen because she was young enough to be flexible and valuable enough to be convincing. But she had learned early that saying no carried its own power, so she had done so calmly, publicly, with just enough sharpness to remind everyone present that she was not a commodity to be bartered. Even if politics insisted otherwise, the human's name was Elias Ward, a military liaison according to the formal introduction, a soldier according to the way he stood, and something else entirely according to the quiet patience in his gaze. When the refusal was delivered, he did not protest, did not plead, did not look wounded or offended. He simply inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her choice as if it had always been hers to make. That alone earned him a few murmurs from the court, because humans were supposed to be desperate. Earth was young, underdeveloped, surrounded by predators wearing smiles and treaties. Desperation was the narrative everyone preferred. Salyra dismissed him from her thoughts as the court moved on, focusing instead on the endless dance of diplomacy, the measured insults disguised as compliments, the delicate balance of appearing benevolent while extracting concessions. She had been trained for this since childhood, trained to smile while entire worlds were rearranged by words alone. But as the hours passed, she found her attention drifting back to the human, who remained seated at the lower tiers, silent, observant, absorbing everything, not with the hungry awe of a species new to the galactic stage, but with the wary calculation of one long familiar with unequal negotiations. When the alarms began, they were subtle at first, a faint harmonic discord rippling through the palace shields, a vibration felt more than heard. Most courtiers did not notice. Those who did assumed it was a systems test or a calibration error, because the capital world of Lythar Prime had not known an attack in over 200 cycles. The idea itself was almost offensive. Salyra noticed because she had grown up listening to the fortress hums beneath the palace. She knew the difference between routine and wrong, and this was wrong. The second alarm was louder, sharper, cutting through conversation like a blade through silk. Guards stiffened, advisors paused mid-sentence, and the massive windows overlooking the city flared with sudden light as defensive arrays activated. Outside, something vast and dark slid into view against the planet's pale sky, followed by another and another, silhouettes jagged and unmistakably hostile. The Korathi raiders, slavers, opportunists who had learned to strike where complacency bloomed, and Lythar Prime had bloomed for far too long. Panic did not erupt immediately. Disbelief held it back for a heartbeat too long. The court had been taught that the Union's presence was deterrent enough, that treaties were shields, that enemies respected borders drawn by consensus. Salyra felt anger rise alongside fear, anger at the lies she had been fed, anger at the fragility of the illusions that kept her people docile. She rose from her throne, issuing commands with practiced authority. Evacuation protocols, shield reinforcement, call the fleets. All of it spoken rapidly, precisely, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they would not be enough. The first impact struck the outer districts, visible even from the palace heights, plumes of fire blossoming where civilian spires once stood. The Korathi did not bother with subtlety. They never had. Terror was part of their strategy. Break morale, scatter defenders, harvest what remained. Salyra's hands clenched at her sides. Her home was burning, and the Union fleets were light years away. Bound by response times and bureaucratic hesitation, she realized with sick clarity that no one was coming fast enough. That was when the human moved. Elias Ward rose from his seat without waiting for instruction. Without drawing attention to himself, he crossed the chamber with long, purposeful strides, speaking quietly into a small device at his collar. Salira did not understand the words, but she recognized the tone. Command, certainty, urgency. Several guards moved to intercept him. Protocol demanded it. But he raised one hand and spoke a single phrase that translated automatically. With your permission, Princess, Earth forces are already inbound. We anticipated a breach risk when the Karathi shifted positions last cycle. She stared at him, shock cutting through the chaos. Anticipated? You knew this could happen? She demanded, her voice sharp. He met her gaze evenly. We knew it might, he replied, so we planned as if it would. Before she could respond, the palace trembled. Not from impact, but from something else. A deep resonant thrum rising from below, from the bedrock itself. Displays flared to life across the chamber. Tactical overlays, unfamiliar symbols, human designations, showing vessels emerging from hidden orbits. Sleek, compact shapes compared to the ornate cruisers of the Union, but moving with frightening speed, darting into formation with surgical precision. The first Karathi ship vanished in a silent bloom of light as its core was pierced by a focused strike. No warning, no broadcast, just elimination. The court erupted then. Fear, outrage, disbelief. How dare an unaligned species deploy weapons within sovereign space? How had they hidden forces so close? What else had they concealed? Salira barely heard them, her attention locked on the displays, on the unfolding battle. The humans did not fight like anyone she had seen. They did not posture, did not threaten, did not trade volleys. They struck vital systems, engines, command nodes, weapon mounts, crippling ships rather than destroying them when possible. Her mind raced as she recognized the pattern. This was not a raid, this was a defense. Elias stood beside her now, uninvited, yet somehow accepted. His presence steady amid the storm. We do not like bullies, Princess, he said quietly, and we especially do not like them when they prey on civilians. Salira looked at him, really looked, seeing past the uniform, the envoy title, the political inconvenience, seeing the protector beneath, the one who had stood alone in a hall of power and refused to beg. You did this for us, she said, her voice softer despite herself. He shook his head slightly. We did this because it was right, and because one day we hoped someone would do the same for us. Outside, the battle turned decisively. Karathi vessels attempted to flee only to be herded back, disabled, boarded. The human ships worked in coordination with planetary defenses, feeding, targeting data, reinforcing shields, minimizing collateral damage with ruthless efficiency. Salira felt a strange tightness in her chest, pride tangled with humility. She had refused this man, thinking him a symbol of weakness, a political concession she did not want. And now he was standing in her throne room, having saved her world without asking for permission. As the last hostile contact winked out, the palace fell into stunned silence. Smoke still rose from the city. Lives had been lost, scars would remain, but the planet still stood. Her people still lived. Salira turned fully toward Ilias, the weight of her earlier refusal pressing heavily now. I misjudged you, she said, and perhaps more than just you. He inclined his head again, the same respectful gesture as before. We are used to that, Princess. Humanity often is. She looked out at the burning horizon, then back at the human who had defended her home when empires hesitated, and for the first time she wondered what it would mean to stand beside him, not as a concession, but as a choice. The fires across Lythar Prime burned for 3 full rotations before the skies finally cleared. Smoke drifting like morning veils between the crystal towers, and Princess Salia stood at the balcony of the palace long after her advisors begged her to rest, because sleep felt like surrender, and because every light flickering back on across the city felt like a question she was not yet ready to answer. Her people were alive, but shaken, grateful, but uncertain, and beneath that gratitude lay fear. Fear not only of the Karathi, but of the humans who had arrived uninvited and left their enemies broken without ceremony. The Union delegation convened within hours of the last Karathi ship being secured, their outrage swift and loud. Accusations layered over concern like poison wrapped in silk, violations of sovereign space, unauthorized military action, destabilizing precedent. The words came sharp and rehearsed, as if they had been waiting for an excuse to say them. Salira sat upon her throne listening, her posture regal, her expression unreadable, while inside her thoughts churned, because every accusation ignored the simple truth that mattered most. The Union fleets had not been there, and the humans had. Elias Ward stood again at the lower tier, not flanked by guards this time, but by quiet human officers projecting holographic data into the chamber, casualty estimates, intercepted Corathi communications, trajectory predictions proving the attack had been imminent long before the Union noticed anything amiss. The evidence was meticulous, cold, devastating, and yet the Union representatives barely glanced at it. Truth had always been secondary to control. Salira knew that better than most. You had no authorization. One envoy snapped. A tall avian species whose people had not seen war in generations. You acted independently, without consensus. Elias did not raise his voice when he replied. Consensus takes time. Civilians do not have that luxury. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Not agreement exactly, but discomfort. Because the words struck too close to reality, Salira surprised herself by standing, her movement cutting through the tension like a blade. She spoke before her advisors could stop her, before caution could smother conviction. The humans acted in defense of my world when others could not, or would not, she said, her voice steady, carrying icily across the hall. Lythar Prime still stands because of them. If there is a crime here, then I will hear the charge explained to the families who are alive today instead of dead. Silence followed, thick and heavy. The Union envoys exchanged glances, recalculating. Salira felt a strange calm settle over her, the kind that came when a decision was already made. There was no going back to comfortable illusions now, not after watching human ships interpose themselves between Corathi weapons and civilian districts, not after seeing the precision with which they fought to preserve rather than dominate. The fallout was swift and relentless. Trade negotiations were suspended, aid shipments delayed under procedural excuses, veiled threats whispered through diplomatic channels. Salira received them all with cool politeness, but each one tightened something inside her chest. She had been raised to navigate politics, but this felt different. This felt like punishment for survival, and she wondered how many other worlds had been taught the same lesson over the centuries. Obey or bleed quietly. Elias requested a private audience 3 cycles after the attack, when the palace corridors were still half darkened and reconstruction drones hummed constantly beyond the walls. Salira agreed, dismissing her attendants, despite their protests. She wanted this conversation unfiltered, honest. He entered alone, his uniform bearing new marks of wear, fatigue etched faintly into his features, but his posture unchanged, still steady, still respectful. You will face consequences for this, she said without preamble. He nodded once. We expected that. Humanity has faced worse for doing less, he replied. She studied him carefully, searching for resentment, ambition, hidden demands, but found none. Why stay? She asked. The Union wants you gone. You have proven your point. He considered before answering. Because leaving now would tell them that pressure works, and because your world is still vulnerable. Her breath caught slightly at that. Vulnerability was not a word royalty enjoyed acknowledging, yet it rang true. The Corathi had been beaten, not eradicated, and opportunists always watched for weakness. You would protect us, she said, half statement, half question. Elias met her gaze directly. We already are. News spread quickly among the populace, not through official channels, but through whispered stories, shared footage, personal accounts, human pilots escorting evacuation transports, human medics treating alien civilians without hesitation, human soldiers standing guard in streets still smoldering. The image of humanity shifted rapidly, from desperate newcomers to something far more unsettling. Protectors who did not ask permission, warriors who did not boast, allies who did not abandon. Salira felt that shift keenly. Every time she walked among her people during reconstruction visits, she heard their gratitude, but also their curiosity. Questions about the humans, about their motives, about the princess who had refused a political bond, and yet now stood aligned with Earth more closely than any treaty demanded. She answered carefully, honestly, admitting uncertainty where it existed. She was done pretending certainty was strength. The Union's response hardened. A formal censure was issued. Earth was labeled destabilizing, its fleets restricted from certain corridors, sanctions hinted at but not yet enacted. Elias briefed Salira privately, his tone grim but controlled. They want to make an example of us, he said. Discourage others from acting independently. Salira's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. And they will hurt my people to do it. He did not deny it. That night she could not sleep. The palace felt too quiet, too exposed. She found herself walking again to the balcony, gazing out at the stars, wondering how many of them hid threats, how many hid allies. Footsteps sounded behind her, and she knew without turning who it would be. Elias stopped a respectful distance away, the city lights reflecting faintly in his eyes. "I refused you," she said quietly. He tilted his head slightly, acknowledging, "You did." She drew a slow breath. "I thought it was strength, to deny what they wanted, to assert my autonomy." He did not interrupt. "But now I wonder if I simply refused to see what stood before me." He was silent for a long moment, then spoke softly. "Strength takes many forms, Princess. Sometimes it is saying no. Sometimes it is knowing when to reconsider." She turned to face him fully then, the weight of her world heavy on her shoulders. "The Union will not stop," she said. "They will push until something breaks." He nodded. "That is their way. Humanity has learned that too." Her gaze searched his, and this time she did not look away. "If I choose to stand with you openly," she said, "not as obligation, not as concession, but as ally, what does that cost?" Elias answered without hesitation, honesty etched into every word. "It will cost you comfort, certainty, and the protection of those who prefer obedience over justice. But it may gain you something rarer, the ability to choose your own future." The wind stirred between them, carrying the distant sounds of rebuilding. Salira felt something shift inside her, fear still present, but no longer alone. The human had defended her home without being asked, had stayed when politics turned hostile, had spoken truth when silence was safer. She realized then that her earlier refusal had not been wrong, but incomplete. She had said no to a symbol, not to the man. "Very well," she said at last, her voice calm, resolute. "We will face what comes together." Elias inclined his head, a small smile touching his lips for the first time since she had met him. "Together," he agreed. Above them the stars burned cold and distant, but for the first time Salira did not feel small beneath them. She felt watched over by something new, something dangerous, something fiercely human. The first sanction struck quietly, wrapped in legal language and transmitted through polite channels. Shipping permits delayed, insurance guarantees revoked, navigation, data access throttled just enough to cause confusion but not outrage. The Union was careful, it always was. Pressure applied slowly, like tightening fingers around a throat. Salira recognized the tactic immediately. She had seen it used against lesser worlds until they begged for compliance, until their leaders signed away autonomy in exchange for relief. What unsettled her was not the strategy, but how calmly Elias accepted the report when it was delivered. "They want us to react emotionally," he said, studying the cascading projections in the war room. "Anger gives them justification. Panic gives them leverage." Salira folded her arms, her expression sharp. "And patience gives them time." He met her gaze. "Patience gives us preparation. Humanity does not rush headlong into traps anymore. Not after learning how expensive that mistake can be." More followed. Union peacekeepers reassigned away from shared borders. Trade partners quietly discouraged from honoring existing contracts. Whispers spreading through neutral systems painting Lythar Prime as unstable, compromised by human aggression. Salira felt the isolation creeping in. Like cold seeping through stone, she convened her council, watched old allies avert their eyes, heard hesitation where confidence once lived. The realization settled heavily. Loyalty within the Union had always been conditional. What surprised her was how little panic spread among her people. Concern yes, fear yes, but also resolve. Human engineers worked alongside Lythari crews to reinforce orbital defenses. Human logistics teams rerouted supply chains through obscure corridors. Human analysts shared predictive models openly, without demanding concessions. The streets buzzed with cooperation rather than despair. Salira saw it during her visits, a shift in spirit. Her citizens had seen someone stand for them, and it had changed something fundamental. The Union noticed too. The first incident was framed as an accident, a Union patrol colliding with a civilian transport near a restricted lane. Lives lost, apologies issued, compensation promised. But Elias stood before Salira with grim eyes. Replaying sensor logs slowed to painful clarity. "That was deliberate," he said, testing response thresholds. Salira felt heat flare behind her eyes. "How many tests before they escalate?" she asked. "As many as it takes to provoke a mistake." That mistake did not come from her, but from someone closer than expected. A senior member of her advisory circle, long trusted, long embedded in Union networks. approached her with a proposal wrapped in concern. Distance yourself from Earth. Reframe the alliance as temporary assistance. Restore balance. It was spoken gently, almost kindly, but Salira heard the threat beneath it. Comply, or be isolated entirely. She dismissed the advisor without answering, but the damage lingered. Betrayal was a poison that spread slowly. She told Elias that night, her voice controlled but tight. He listened without interruption, then nodded. Infiltration and pressure are always paired. If brute force fails, corrode from within. Salira looked away, toward the city lights. How many of my people will they turn? He answered honestly, some, but fewer than they expect. The escalation came 3 cycles later, without warning. Union Command issued a joint security directive, declaring the human fleet presence near Lythar Prime a destabilizing force, ordering immediate withdrawal pending investigation. Refusal would be treated as hostile non-compliance. Salira read the message twice, then a third time, each word a blade. She looked up at Elias. If you leave, we are exposed. He nodded. If we stay, we are declaring that words alone no longer bind us. The council chamber filled quickly, advisors arguing in raised voices, fear bleeding through professionalism. Salira stood silently at the center, listening, weighing. The old instinct urged compromise, survival through submission, but another memory burned brighter. Human ships intercepting Coercion fire without hesitation. Human soldiers pulling alien children from rubble. She raised her hand, and the room fell quiet. We will not ask them to leave, she said, her voice steady, carrying authority, born not of tradition but of choice. Murmurs erupted, outrage, relief, terror. She did not waver. I will not reward protection with abandonment, nor obedience with safety. This world stands because someone acted when others hesitated. I will not become the reason that lesson is forgotten. The message was sent, brief, formal, unmistakable. Lythar Prime recognizes humanity as a defensive ally acting at our invitation. All Union actions taken against them will be considered actions taken against us. Salira felt the weight of the words as they left her. Like a bridge burned behind her, Elias watched her quietly, then inclined his head with unmistakable respect. You understand what this means, he said. She met his gaze, completely. He allowed himself a faint smile. Then humanity will respond accordingly. The response was not immediate, and that frightened her more than open threats. Silence stretched across the channels. Fleets repositioned subtly. Data traffic spiked. Elias's people moved with quiet intensity. Readiness drills, evacuation planning, diplomatic outreach to non-aligned systems. Salira saw the scope of it then. Humanity was not improvising. They had contingency layers she had never imagined. Plans built upon the assumption that alliances fail and power must stand alone. When the Union fleet arrived, it did so under the banner of peacekeeping. Massive vessels emerging from fold space at the edge of the system, their presence heavy, undeniable. Salira stood beside Elias in the command center, watching the tactical display, her pulse steady despite the odds. The Union hailed them, demands issued, ultimatums framed as concern. Withdraw the humans, submit to arbitration, or face enforcement. Elias did not answer immediately. Instead, he opened a secure channel to say, once I transmit this response, there is no walking it back. He said. She did not hesitate. Transmit, she replied. The human reply was calm, measured, devastating in its clarity. We are present at the request of a sovereign world. Any hostile action against this system will be met with proportional response. We advise de-escalation, for your sake as much as ours. Salira held her breath as the message ended, waiting for outrage, for threats, for the first strike. Instead, the Union hesitated. That hesitation told her everything. Power respected power, and the humans had shown enough of it to give even ancient empires pause. Still, she knew this was not victory, merely a standoff, one that could turn bloody with a single miscalculation. Hours passed, then days, tension hanging like a blade, suspended by a thread. In the midst of it, a Union-allied system broke ranks, issuing a public statement supporting Lythar Prime's right to self-defense. Another followed, then a third, cracks spreading through the facade of unanimity. Salira watched the news feeds in disbelief. Ilias exhaled slowly. Dominoes, he said. Once one falls, others remember they can choose. The Union fleet withdrew incrementally, citing ongoing review, saving face, retreating without admitting defeat. The system breathed again. Though the future remained uncertain, Salira felt exhaustion crash over her now that the immediate danger had passed. She leaned against the console, steadying herself. Elias was at her side instantly. "Are you all right?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. She smiled faintly, tired, but still standing. She looked at him then, really looked, and understood that the danger of humanity was not their weapons, nor their fleets, but their refusal to accept the limits imposed upon them. They did not ask to be feared, but they would not accept being controlled, and in choosing to stand with them, she had inherited both their risks and their resolve. "This is not over," she said quietly. He nodded. "It never is. But now you are not alone." She met his gaze, feeling something settle between them. Not obligation, not politics, but trust forged under pressure. "Whatever comes next," she said, "we face it together." Elias inclined his head, a promise without words. Together, beyond the view, the stars seemed a little closer than before, a little less indifferent, and Salira knew that the galaxy had shifted, not because an empire commanded it, but because two worlds had chosen to stand instead of kneel. The galaxy did not erupt after the standoff. It watched, waited, recalculated, and that restraint proved more dangerous than open war. Because restraint meant planning, Salira felt it in the weeks that followed, in the careful phrasing of diplomatic messages, in the sudden politeness of former critics, in the way Union representatives spoke of peace while quietly restructuring fleets far from public view. The threat had not vanished, it had simply changed shape. Human presence on Lythar Prime became normalized with startling speed, patrols integrated, command structures shared, protocols harmonized, not through domination but negotiation. Salira observed every meeting closely, expecting friction, resentment, cultural clashes, but instead she saw something unfamiliar. Humans listened, argued, compromised, and when they disagreed, they explained why. Authority among them seemed earned rather than inherited, and that alone shifted how her own officers began to think. The Union attempted one final gambit, not military, but symbolic. A formal convocation was announced, a galaxy-wide address declaring the restoration of order. Salira was invited under the assumption that she would appear alone. The implication clear: attend without humanity, reaffirm allegiance, return to the fold. Her advisors urged caution, some urged compliance, old instincts whispering that survival lay in appeasement. She asked Elias for his counsel privately, not as commander, not as envoy, but as the man who had stood in her throne room when her world burned. He listened, arms folded, expression thoughtful, then spoke plainly. "They are offering you safety in exchange for silence. If you accept, they will never fear defying you again." She exhaled slowly. "And if I refuse?" He met her gaze steadily. "Then they will learn that power no longer flows only one direction." The decision crystallized with startling clarity. Salira requested that Elias attend the convocation with her, not behind her, not beneath her, but beside her, equal in presence, if not in title. The Union objected, citing protocol, tradition, precedent. Salira replied simply that precedent was a luxury of those who never needed protection. The objection was withdrawn. The convocation chamber dwarfed even her own palace hall, an arena of stars and banners, ancient symbols etched into light. Salira felt the weight of history press upon her as she entered. But she did not walk alone. Elias matched her pace, step for step, his presence steady, unyielding. The murmurs began instantly, shock rippling through the assembly. Humans were not supposed to stand there, not yet, not without permission. The Union speaker began with practiced eloquence, praising unity, stability, shared destiny, carefully omitting recent events, carefully framing the narrative, as if nothing had truly changed. Salira listened, calm, patient, then stepped forward when invited to speak. Her voice carried clearly, amplified, not by technology alone, but by the stillness of the crowd. "My world was attacked," she said, plainly, without ornament. When help was needed most, it did not come from treaties or councils. It came from those willing to act. A ripple of discomfort moved through the chamber. She continued, "I was offered safety in exchange for obedience. I refused, not because I sought conflict, but because survival without dignity is merely delayed extinction." She gestured then, subtly, to Elias beside her. "Humanity stood with us when it was inconvenient, when it carried consequence, when it guaranteed retaliation. They did not ask for territory, nor tribute, nor submission. They asked only to protect. If that frightens you," she paused, letting the silence stretch, "then perhaps it should." The response was immediate: outrage from some quarters, stunned silence from others. But before the Union speaker could regain control, Elias stepped forward as well, his voice calm, measured, carrying a different weight. "Humanity does not seek dominance," he said. "We seek the freedom to choose our actions and our allies. We will not be constrained by systems that prioritize order over lives, nor will we abandon those who stand with us. This is not a threat, it is a promise, for a heartbeat." The galaxy held its breath. Then something extraordinary happened. A representative from a minor border system rose and spoke in support, recounting their own experience of delayed aid. Another followed, then another. Voices long muted finding courage in the open defiance before them. Celera felt tears sting her eyes as she realized what was unfolding. The Union's greatest weapon had always been isolation, and isolation was breaking. The convocation ended without resolution. No declarations of war, no sweeping but the damage was done. Narratives had cracked. Power had shifted. As Celera and Elias departed, the stares they received were no longer dismissive. They were wary, calculating, respectful. Returning to Lythar Prime felt different. The sky seemed brighter, the air lighter. Reconstruction nearly complete. Children played again in streets once scarred by fire. Celera walked among them without escort. Elias a few steps behind, not guarding, simply present. Citizens greeted them openly now, not with awe, but with warmth, with trust. That evening, on the same balcony where uncertainty had once weighed heavily, Celera stood beside Elias, watching the stars. The future stretched before them, vast and dangerous. She turned to him, her expression serious but unafraid. "I refused you once," she said softly. He nodded. "You did." She smiled faintly. "I do not refuse you now, not as symbol, not as shield, but as partner, as equal, as someone I choose." Elias did not speak immediately, emotion flickering briefly across his usually composed features. Then he inclined his head, slower this time, deeper, a gesture no longer bound by protocol, but by respect. "Humanity stands with you, Celera of Lythar Prime, not because of obligation, but because you stood when it mattered." The galaxy would debate the moment endlessly. Historians would argue over dates and declarations, over when the balance truly shifted, but Celera knew the truth. It had shifted when she stopped seeing humanity as a liability and started seeing them as mirrors, reflecting what courage looked like when stripped of ceremony. Above them, human and Lythari ships moved together in silent patrol, not an empire's fleet, not a conqueror's armada, but a promise made visible that protection did not require permission, that alliances forged in fire were stronger than those signed in marble halls. For the first time in generations, Celera felt hope, untainted by fear, not because the future was safe, but because it was hers to face. And beside her stood a human who had defended her home when she said no, and stayed long enough to earn her yes.